All righty, everyone. Welcome to the second part of our two-part Fall Birding 101 refresher. We're so excited to have plenty of you here tonight and really excited that you joined us for this class. Hope you enjoyed Tuesday's session. And if you haven't been a part of our spring class yet, which this is really a follow-up from, make sure you check out our Spring Birding 101 videos or join us next February, March when we hold the class again. So today we are going to be focused on backyard bird ID and particularly some unique species and groups of species that may be moving through your backyard in the fall and might not have seen as many of in the spring. And we're also going to talk about how you can make your backyard habitat. And so, really, we're going to talk about backyard conservation, how you can help out, but also how you can plan out your own incredible habitat in the form of gardens and native plantings. So, let's dive right into it. My name's Elliot Nelson, and I'm with the Michigan Sea Grant Program. We talked a little bit about who we were last time, and our my co kind of birder extraordinaire is Cindy Hudson, who's on this with me. And the two of us together run this Birding 101 class on behalf of Michigan Sea Grant, a program of Michigan State University Extension. Now, I want to ask you a quick trivia question. So if you have not found the chat section, pull up the chat box, which should be somewhere around your screen by that sliding Zoom bar. And I want you to give a guess on this question. How much Great Lakes coastline do you think there is? So go ahead, pull up the chat, put in A, B, C, or D. But I'll read you here. A is around the same as the Atlantic New England coastline. So, sort of, Maryland or wherever the New England starts all the way up to Maine. Um, the Atlantic coastline, so the whole coastline from the tip of Florida all the way up to Maine, the same amount as the entire U.S. Atlantic coastline and the Gulf of Mexico combined, or the Gulf of Mexico. So we've got a few guesses coming in, and we're up there at the higher amount. And so I'm gonna reveal the answer now after getting those last guesses in. Ooh, we got a little split here in B, C, D, and it is D. So we actually have in the Great Lakes as much coastline as the entire Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast combined. That's right. You heard that right. It is an incredible amount of coastline, and all those islands and crags and bays increase that coastline even more to where just in Michigan alone, we have 3,288 miles of coastline, more than any other state except for Alaska. And it's an abundance of freshwater resources. It's not just the Great Lakes. We also have 22,000 inland lakes, 36,000 miles of rivers, and over 125 or 120 waterfalls. So that kind of resource, that natural resource of fresh water, really is important to the birds. It's important to us. It's part of our lifeline, but it also draws in a lot of birds for both the resource and the way it funnels birds that don't like to fly over water. And so, speaking of birds, how many bird species have been seen in the state of Michigan? So, what do you think? Is it 1 to 200 species, 2 to 300, 3 to 400, or 400 to 500? So, go ahead, you can put that guess in. If you were paying attention last week, you might actually know the answer already. But how many species in total do we have that have ever been seen in the state? So, even the ones that accidentally got blown in here and such. And so, I'll give you a few more. We're all over the place with this one. This is a hard one, right? It's hard to know how many species we even have that nest here, let alone how many have ever showed up. But we do have quite a few people that like to keep track of this. And the actual answer is, got quite a few guesses, so I'm going to give her a reveal. Bam! It's actually pushing 500 species now. And there are, believe it or not, a few handful of people in the state who have seen over 400 species in the state of Michigan, which is truly an incredible feat to reach that on your life list. But it's pushing well over up into 500 now. I don't know the exact number, and we actually have been adding new ones every year the last few years. So it just keeps going up and up. So it's actually 461 as of last year. I think we added two new birds last year in the records committee. So now we're actually at 463, which is really incredible. And you never know what will show up in the state of Michigan, especially like in the fall, like this white-eared hummingbird, which is a hummingbird from Arizona that ended up in the UP one year. But 461 is a lot, but we only have about 237 that actually breed here that will stay around in the summer. Things like our Kirtland's warbler. And in your backyard, you're really only going to actually end up with about 10 to 30 species, like this beautiful little dark-eyed junco that we learned last week. So even though Michigan is truly an incredible state for birding, even though the Great Lakes are intimately tied to our lives and to the bird lives, and they're really closely connected, when it comes to birding as a hobby, you don't have to worry about that 461 number just quite yet. You could start with the 10 to 30 that's in your own backyard, and you'll quickly start to become familiar with those common birds that are in your backyard, and it will really start to excel your birding skills. So, speaking of those backyard birds, we're going to start out with learning a few more of the ones that might be coming through this fall. And so, we're going to start out by one. Don't say what this species is. Nobody put that in the chat yet. We want to leave it a mystery for those that don't know. But I want you to start observing this bird, okay? This is a species that you may have seen throughout the summer, but it's really going to congregate in bigger groups in the fall and especially into the winter. So, what we're going to do is we're going to practice our bird observation skills from last time and from the spring. I want you to start pulling up that chat there and start listing what are some of the observations you could make about this bird? What are the structures you see on it? What's the pattern? What's the relative size, right? Like the size of the bill versus the head or the tail versus the body. Compare the bird size to itself or compare it to known things around you. There's also behavior and location and habitat. You can get a little bit of habitat from this, but not really much on behavior. So go ahead. We got our first observation from Betty. That's a really great one. Wing bands, or what we call wing bars. So very defined bars across those wings there. So that's a great. Those two nice, obvious wing bars are really, really good. Um, Forked tail or split tail is what you're saying there, Linda. That's awesome. Yes, it has a notch in the tail. Notches are very distinct features in tails, so that's an important one to note. Kaya, you got the short cone-shaped bill. I love that. It really is shaped like a cone. It's a little bit wider, a little bit more stout than some other birds' bills. It's not that kind of long. And then we've got some nice colors or nice notes on the colors there, Deb, and kind of the patterns is that you're seeing a bit of yellowish wash on the head, but otherwise quite drab and plain on the head. But that little bit of note of that yellow there could be important for us. So those are all great observations. Some other observations you might make is the black and white pattern on the wing, or possibly just sort of a drab overall brownish color on the breast. But really, you all nailed it with lots of great observations. So once we observe that bird, as long as we can, remember they're small, the small ones tend to move really fast. So you want to watch it as long as you can. After you watch it, you take your notes, and that's really what our chat was there, our notes about what we really are seeing there before we open our field guide. And next we open our field guide. Now, to open the field guide, this is where I always have a hard time telling you exactly what to do because there's a lot in your field guide. But we want to look for the category of bird that this might fall into. This is a smaller bird. It's smaller than a sparrow or around the size of a sparrow. Definitely smaller than a robin. And so that is kind of gives you an idea of size that you might know if you were seeing it in the field. And based on that, does anybody have a guess as to what group of birds this fits in? And groups, I'm talking about things like ducks or swans or things like sparrows or warblers, flycatchers. There's lots of different possibilities. So if anybody has a guess as to what group, you can go ahead. So kind of similar to the junco, and remember the junco was in the sparrow group, and that's a really good guess because it does have some very sparrow-like qualities, but there's not quite as brown and streaky as most sparrows are, although the junco is not. And one thing that's a little unique is that sparrows don't quite have as cone-like of a bill as that. They're normally a little more compressed. And there's another group that is very similar to sparrows. And really, sparrows and Vanessa said it, finches are really close in appearance. So sparrow is a great guess, and finch would be your second. So if you're ever confused between a sparrow or a finch, just remember those two are pretty similar. But we're going to look at this in the finch group. So this is the finch group from the Sibley Guide to Birds of North America. And you can see there's not a ton of finches. And I'll actually just tell you a few of these we really don't have to worry about because they're not going to be in Michigan. It would be extremely rare. But also, if we start looking at the features, we can cross out a lot of these birds, right? That whole top row, those birds are all not going to be in our area, but also none of them really have that plain head with a little yellowish wash. This pine grosbeak, though, matches some of our features. None of these streaky birds, right? The streaky ones we can cross out. This bird has those white wing bars, so we might want to consider him as well. Cross these ones out, and then maybe we could leave these ones here on the bottom. The rest we can cross out um, because of many obvious things like it doesn't look at all like what we're seeing. I don't know how else to say it. So based on that, anybody want to give a guess? Oh, Deb did it right there. Awesome. American goldfinch. You got it, Deb. Nice job. And many of you others were probably already leaning that direction, that it was probably one of the goldfinches. The pine grosbeak, it doesn't have as bold of a wing bar, and it doesn't have a short tail either. Look at how long that tail is. So we can cross out pine grosbeak, and that gives us the pine siskins and the goldfinches. Pine siskins very streaky on the breast. We don't have that. And if you look at the three goldfinches, only one's expected in Michigan. That's the American. But even if once you get into those, you'll notice that the lesser and the Lawrence goldfinch have several features that aren't lining up with our bird here. So nice job. This is the winter plumage of the American goldfinch. And so, what you'll notice is that they change a lot, right? Here's a breeding male and a breeding female. Even the female has quite bright yellow on its head in the summer months. But in the sorry, that was the breeding female here. Quite bright yellow even in the summer months. But this is most likely a male or female non-breeding bird when their wing bars become a lot more whitish and their yellow mostly is subdued this time of year. So nice job, everyone. Way to go. You've identified a finch, and finches are something that you could really look forward to in this fall and especially the winter months as we get deeper. But you never know what kind of finch you're going to see. We have only a handful of finches in Michigan, and the two most common well, I shouldn't say the two most common, but two that you could expect to be migratory and start showing up are the American goldfinch and the pine siskin, but they don't always come in big numbers. So it depends on the year. They're eruptive, but some years you'll get hundreds of these at your feeders, and other years you may only have a few or none. Now, a few other fun ones to look out for. Uh, are redpolls. So actually, these are now considered a single species. So I have hoary and common redpoll listed there, but they've been lumped into one species. And essentially, these are Arctic birds that in some years will spread even into the lower peninsula. I get them most years up here in the UP, but not every year. And again, they're really irregular in their migration, but they might start showing up this fall and into the winter if you look for a bird that's a lot more pale and streaky, a little red dot on the top of its head. Um, and then lastly, we have our two finches here on the right, a house finch and a purple finch. Now, these two, the house finch right here can be very common in urban areas. It's actually not really native to Michigan. It's spread throughout the whole US. But a few key notes on the house finch, which is still a beautiful one, to differentiate from the purple finch. Well, let's have you look at it for a second. These two species, the house finch and the purple finch, are very similar. Both are very possible for your feeders this spring or this fall and into the winter. The house finch is a local species that doesn't move around much, and the purple finch is a native species that moves around a lot. And so you may see in big numbers some year and not in others. So this winter, you really want to pay attention. You'll probably have some house finches if you live in an urban area. But you may end up with some purple finches. But how do we tell those two apart? This gets into the weeds. So, really quick, give these two a look and see if you can put in the chat any differentiation between those two species, the house finch and the purple finch. They're pretty tough, but I bet you can start once you really get into the weeds on these birds, right? Hopefully, they're not in too thick a weed so you can see them. But you'll start to notice there are some subtle differences. So, again, if anybody can notice any difference between the house finch and the purple finch, go ahead and put that in the chat. I'll give you a second to look at it. Ah, yes. So the amount of color. So Deb says the purple finch has a lot more purple versus kind of the red of the house finch. We also have maybe some differences on the striping, and I think particularly on the side, and some differences in the bills. So let's kind of key in on those. Those are great job, everyone. You really found all three right off the bat. So first off is the color of red versus purple. Now, that is just something you'll find in fields books. They often call the purple finch a raspberry color and the house finch a true red. But the reality is, if these two aren't side by side, you're not going to be able to tell if that's like a reddish purple or a purplish red. Okay. It's a little tough when they're not side by side to really see those differences. And depending on the lighting, they can look very similar in color. But the extent of that coloring is very significant. You'll notice in the purple finch that the coloring, the purplish reddish color, can extend all the way down, even faintly into the breast, and also is on the rump. Whereas in the house finch, the coloring is only restricted to the head and maybe a little bit of the throat. So that's one difference right off the bat. That's a really good one. Somebody also mentioned the streaks. And so this is partially obvious here because the streaks on the house finch don't have that purple color in it. The purple finch does have streaks. They're a little hidden by him fluffing up his feathers here, but those streaks are mixed with that purplish color. And then lastly, the bill. So the bill in a house finch looks different. And if you look really closely at the culmen, which is the line between the upper and the lower bill, it actually descends a little bit. So it actually is curved down that bill. Whereas in the purple finch, it's a straight line. So this is a really tough one to see unless you have really good pictures or really good looks at the birds. But that's a third one. So voila! See, even two of the toughest birds to differentiate, those two are really tough. You already were starting to see, once you really start looking, some of the differences there. So just wanted to show you that. Hats off. You can even deal with the tough IDs. Good job, everyone. And if you were just lost that whole time, that's okay too. I would have been lost the whole time if I had just been starting birding. So those of you that are picking up on already, pat yourself on the back. The rest of you, don't feel bad. It takes time, and you're learning with us. All right. Here's another one, and this one we're not going to do the full observation thing here, but I wanted to note that another group of birds that's going to be coming through in the fall, and especially in the late fall, as we talked about on Tuesday, is that group of sparrows. And sparrows will form mixed flocks and really show up in big numbers. And sparrows are what we often call the LBBs, the little brown birds. They're all brown and streaky. And in the fall, they get even more hard to identify because of ways. But one of the resources that's out there, and this is really better for spring birds, but it still is a good spring and summer birds, but it's still a good one, is called Birdface. And you could also find a very similar picture to this because Birdface is somewhat defunct now. It's not really maintained. It used to be an app. I don't think the app's available. You can still find this image online though. And American Birding Association has a similar one. And it kind of breaks the sparrows down just into their faces. Their faces are each unique and have different stripe patterning. So for this one, if anybody can pick out what species we have here, which species has white, black, white, black on the head that goes down to the eye and doesn't descend lower than that? Any guesses? So we've got two similar guesses here, and I really like that. And I'm going to remove my yellow lines there because they may confuse. So we're looking at either the white-throated, which has that white, black, or the white crown, which has that black, white, black. Now, the minor differences are one, a white-throated sparrow actually has white at the very crown of its head, and so does the black or white-throated. But the difference is that the white-throated sparrow has a small yellow dot in front of its eye, and in this case, we're not seeing that yellow dot there. So that's one way to kind of help us out is to use some of these sort of cheat sheets for the really tricky birds. I showed you the fall warblers in the Peterson guide. That's another great resource like this, a quick cheat sheet that gets you to exactly those tough ones to differentiate. Yes, you noted beak color. Michelle, great observation that not everything lines up here right? Yeah, sure. White crown has that same color on the top, but the beak color is not right. And the reality is birds will change over time and depending on the time of year and have slight differences. Um, I'm not sure if this is an error of the image or error of the bird having a yellow bill, but the reality is white crowned sparrows' bills will change color a little bit throughout the year. And also, this down here, guess what, is also a white crowned sparrow. So you can see that white crowned sparrow has a darker bill. It's still a little pale, but the head, what's going on there? Well, what I wanted to show you was that one, birds do change color most of the time in the fall. They get a little more drab and they get a little harder to identify, but the patterns stay the same often. And in this case, you can still see light, dark as the patterning on this white crowned sparrow. And so even though the colors are off, the pattern's still the same. The structure is still the same. It still has streaky back, still has the same shaped bill. And so even though colors change, patterns are generally consistent as are structures. And that's why, again, over reliance on sparrows, that our over reliance on color can be a bit of a downside sometimes. And yes, this is like the toughest group. I almost didn't want to put it up here, Betty, because these LBBs are tough. And like honestly, this time of year with a lot of juvenile birds and transition plumage birds, I just kind of enjoy having a big flock of sparrows and know I probably won't identify most of these. But every once in a while, you can pick out a sparrow in these flocks and be like, oh, I do know that one. And I do know that one. And once you kind of get a sense of what's in that flock, you'll start to realize the variation within that species. All right. I've got about 10 more minutes, so I hand this over to Cindy here. So I want to keep us moving along. Let's do another one here. This is another observation. So let's do some observations. Uh, yeah, let's kind of see what we got here. How would you describe this bird? Yeah, so it has a very light colored eye ring, right? That actual inside of the eye is very pale. We also have a notable beak here that's quite chunky, right, and long. We have an iridescent color, right, on the head and the chest. And yeah, good, Vanessa. This is probably bigger than a robin. Just based on that piece of wood there, and you're correct. It is definitely bigger than a robin, only a little bit, but certainly longer than a robin. And yeah, so it's not a ton of things to go off of, right? There's not a lot of patterning on this bird, not a lot of plumage that's unique, but does have that sort of iridescent head, really chunky bill. Uh, and long tail, Betty, great note. Long tail, and this whole group of birds that this is in have long tails. So now that's I think about all the features we could note on this bird as it is here. What group of birds then do we think this falls within? What are these kind of darker colored birds, uniform in color normally? Um, yes, ones that chase off other birds sometimes from your feeders. That's another behavior of these. Does anybody know what group of birds this might fall into? Ah, yes. So we have some specific birds guess, crow and starling, and I'll just say yes, that's sort of the general right one, grackle possibly. It is the blackbirds. So this is a group called Icteridae, which includes all of the blackbirds, not the crows, those are corvids, but they're actually more related to jays. But the Icteridae is the blackbirds and orioles actually are who's related to the blackbirds here. So if we start looking through this, obviously we can cross off all the orioles. They're all brightly colored, and this is not. We can cross off the meadowlarks that are somewhat related, and the bobolink and the yellow. And so that leaves us a small group of blackbirds. Now, if you want to take a guess, go for it. We've had a right guess already. But go ahead if you want to take a guess as to what species you think this might be based on these. Grackle. Okay, so we got a few votes for grackle there. So let's go a little bit deeper into the blackbirds. And now you might be thinking, why is he talking about blackbirds? These are those mean birds that come and scare off all the birds at my feeders. But I'm going to come back to that in a second. So the grackle is somewhat similar to a rusty blackbird in that they also have a bluish color overall. But the grackles have that much thicker bill, really long tail. And what's also notable about the tail is you'll see up in this little picture here, and I've got some better pictures of this later, is that the tail is actually spade shaped and even tilted upward. So if you were looking at the tail from behind, it would look like my hands right now, in that it actually isn't flat. It actually cupped almost. And the middle feathers are longer than the side feathers, so it gives it a spade shape, a kind of pointy shape instead of an even fan shape. And so, yeah, that's the common grackle. Now, you often see these not just by themselves, but in a situation where they may be mixed around with all these. These are our blackbirds. And first off, I just have to say, to me, blackbirds are one of my absolute favorite groups of birds. And you might be, "Oh, what? But they are so mean at the feeders, right? They're very aggressive at the feeders. And they often also show up in huge flocks, sometimes hundreds of birds, especially in the fall this time of year. Blackbirds will start to form multi-species flocks where they group up with other species of blackbirds and some even non-blackbird things, and they migrate together in these huge swarms. And when they descend upon your house, it could be a little intimidating, but when you start to look through that flock and notice the features and behaviors, you'll start to see some incredible things with blackbirds. They really are just a really interesting group of species. First off, one of the things I started noticing was one, there's different species. So, most of the time your flocks are going to have some European starlings and maybe some common grackles. But if you look closely, you might also see both male and female red-winged blackbirds and brown-headed cowbirds. And if you're really lucky, and this is my favorite part, it's like looking for the hidden gem in the kind of flock of gems, but is the rusty blackbird. This is a species that's seen somewhere, I think, 70% decline in their population. They're becoming really quite rare, actually. But they will mix in with this flock, along with another one called Brewer's blackbird that I haven't put here. Um, and once you kind of get into those features of how these birds are different, it really becomes fun finding the differences. Obviously, the grackles and the rusty blackbird are the two kind of solid color ones, but you'll notice rusty blackbirds in the fall can get this brownish, rusty color on them. And again, the bill shape is different as well as the tail. Starlings are actually not a blackbird. They're a European species. They're not related, but they do mix into these flocks and we see them a lot. They, of course, have a much skinnier bill and it's often yellow, although it can appear a little dark. And they have often white flecks all through them. So they'll stick out a bit. You'll notice them. They just structurally don't quite look the same. Then the red-winged blackbird, of course, if it has the red wing, that makes it pretty easy to ID. If you don't see the red because you don't have the right angle, you'll also notice the bill is very sharp. It's really a very knife-like bill. Unlike that common grackle is a little chunky, it's a very knife-like bill. And then the last one is the brown-headed cowbird. It gets a bad rap because it's a parasitic nester, but it is really an incredible evolutionary strategy they have. And their bills are quite chunky a bit more, and they have, of course, the brown head when they're males, or just all drab brown as females. So when you see that blackbird flock come, yes, they may clean out your feeders, and your local birds may not have access to the feeder for the moments while they're there. But do note what you're seeing are hundreds of birds that have decided to form multiple species flocks and move across our country in huge movements, which is really incredible. And they play a super important role as a pest management. They really control a lot of pest bugs across our country in those big roving flocks. So uh, let's do a little scene if we can tease out who is who here. So, what species do we have in this picture? And go ahead, you can start putting it in the chat. Um, oh yeah, Betty is totally right too. In flight, European starlings look like a like a just a tube almost. They're really sharp wings. They look just like a plane wing. But anyway, looking at this here, just kind of thinking back to our species, which species do we have here? So we've got this yellow bill and this kind of um, lighter colored bird with the little flecking. So we've got some guesses here. We've got starling. That would be correct. We got our starling right there. We also have our grackle. You can see that nice big chunky bill. It's not like a knife, it has a slight curve to it. And that pale eye, too, is a really key feature. And that's our common grackle. And a few folks also noticed over here in the corner and also down here at the bottom, we have both a male and a female brown-headed cowbird. So nice job. You're starting to see that variation in the flock. All right, let's go another one. Who do we got in this group here? Now, this one's a bit bigger, so it might take you a little longer to look through. But, you know, again, we don't have a ton to pick through, so, or a ton of options to pick from. Any guesses as to what we're seeing in this group? Grackle. All right, Cheryl, you got it. So grackles are definitely our iridescent one here with those bigger bills. We, of course, also have a bit of red coming through on a lot of these wings. Even these ones that are brown and streaky, they're actually first year males and they're just getting that red coming in. But of course, that would be our red-winged blackbird. Somebody sees a white-crowned sparrow in there? Where is that? I don't see it. You see it, Cindy? I'm gonna have to scour this whole thing now. I don't see a white crowned sparrow, but I do see down here in the bottom and over here as well. These are the female red-winged blackbirds, so that brown streaky one. And then we also have a few brown-headed cowbirds that are mixed in there. So that's all I've ever been able to see out here. We don't have rusty blackbirds, as far as I can tell. This is a brown-headed cowbird here. Rusty blackbirds would have a bill very much like the red-winged blackbird, but with the rusty flecking on them, which I don't see. But if we go to this one, here's our last one. So this is the last one before I kind of wrap us up here on this part and turn it over to Cindy. If you notice, this is a really good one I like to show, and I sometimes throw this picture in here too. This is a nice comparison of our rusty blackbirds and our common grackle. So these are two rusty blackbirds here in the middle, and these are two common grackles here on the right. So first off, they both have the pale eyes, which, you know, that's a bit of a giveaway. Oh, and we also have a red-winged blackbird here too, which is nice to compare. The red-winged blackbirds don't have the pale eye, but the rusty blackbirds do, and so do the grackle. The rusty blackbirds here have that nice rusty flecking, so we can pick them out. But also notice the tail of that rusty blackbird is a nice even fan shape, whereas the tail of the grackle has more of that spade and scoop shape. All right. Well, I hope you can learn to love blackbirds. And if not, just pull your feeders down when they come and they'll be gone in a day or two. They don't last very long at most spots that they descend upon in the fall. But if you do have them, take a chance to try to figure out, what do I have in here? Is there a few couple species? Is there two? Is there three? Do I even have a rusty in there? And really give them some time to kind of enjoy. And remember, you don't have to identify every bird. That is not possible, and it's just about having fun, and your skills will build as with time. All right. So that was kind of a bit on our thing there, and I do have a quick question I'll take. So somebody asked, you know, in large flocks such as blackbirds, that's when we see them all take flight at the same time and form what we call a murmuration. A murmuration is when a group of birds is all in the air at the same time, could be hundreds or even thousands, and somehow kind of moves as a unified flocks and kind of moves together. You've probably seen these pictures of videos of European starlings doing that, but all the blackbirds will do that as well as other flocking birds. What is it that allows them to do that? And how do they know to all pick up at the same time? Well, what causes the birds to fly in the first place could just be a predator or a scare or something. But how they all know to pick up and how they all know to fly in sync, as far as I know, is an unsolved mystery. And I like to point that out because there are so many things we still don't know about birds, so much interesting stuff still. So anyway, that's that question. But I see some of you are already starting to answer the question here. So based on this picture, this is from our spring class, what might be some threats to birds here? Sakia first says, window collisions can be a real detriment to birds. They don't see them often and they run into them. Weed-free yard, and that's short. Now, that can be fine to have weed-free yard and mowed short, but it probably means you're using chemicals to keep the weeds out. And it also means you have less diversity in your yard. So, you can leave the mowed a little longer, allow a little diversity, or just kind of reduce the part of your yard that's grass. Another one on there is the light. So lights at night can disrupt migration. And so that could be a really key one. And an easy one is to not have lights on at your house at night. Now, I know a lot of us are scared of the dark. Deep down, none of us really grew up, right? We're all still pretty scared of the dark. So we like to have those lights on. But just consider switching to like a motion sensor light or a switch that you turn on and off instead of a light that's just on constantly all night long. Those are just some easy ways. And non-native plants. We've got a purple loosestrife down there in the corner. So there's also a cat. Cats are one of the biggest killer of birds. So if you ever get a new cat, please keep it indoors. It's better for your cat and it's better for the birds. If you have an outdoor cat now, consider moving it inside, or if that's not possible, at least try to give it a bell, although that's not 100% effective. All right, so don't use invasives. Consider the cats. No wall up on the windows. Turn off exterior lights at night and reduce pesticides and avoid poisons. This is a little just refresher from our spring, but these are some things you can do. And Cindy's going to cover a bit more about how you can really create habitat, not just reduce threats. And last but not least, of course, feed the birds. I don't know if you were here last week when we said feeding the birds in the fall does not stop their migration. That's a myth. Unless you have waterfowl, then don't feed the birds. But other than waterfowl, ducks, and geese and swans, it's good to feed the birds all through the fall. It's really going to give them that recharge as long as you keep those feeders clean and use appropriate feed. And with that, I'm going to ask Cindy to take over from here and tell us a little bit more about how to turn your backyard into bird habitat.
Thank you, Elliot. I forgot that I had a part. I was so mesmerized by the blackbird stuff, trying to pick out the blackbirds there, and also I listen every time. I listen every single time about purple and house finches, and I still can't get it. I sit there and I stare at those little birds, and I just wonder. But someday I'll figure it out. So, Elliot was talking about how important it is to have diversity in your yard. And it's pretty obvious from this picture. You can see, down at the bottom here, we have nice traditional backyard, and people would be very proud of it with the grass and their really pretty shrubbery that's cut and everything, and they're watering their yard. That's great. You'll notice over here on the right-hand side, they don't have a lot of diversity of insects being attracted to their yard. And this is a choice. All of this is a choice. You have to decide how much work you want to do, how much you want to have, how much you appreciate the insects coming so that the birds can feed off of the insects. It's all just part of the big food web that's out there. The next one in the middle, you see they got a little bit better, a little bit of diversity in their lawn. They've added in some flowers. They've got a vegetable garden, and they get a better diversity of insects, which means they are going to get a better diversity of birds coming to their yard. And then, of course, the one at the top, the cottage garden kind of area, it also includes a water feature for the birds. They've got the trees, they've got shrubbery, they've got it all, and they've got the most diversity. Again, nothing completely wrong with this picture at the bottom, but it isn't going to draw in the birds. And if that's your goal, then what you want to do is have a bird-friendly backyard. And I will be sending out a link so that you can actually get this picture. This graphic is from Michigan Audubon, but I'll send out a link where you can get all this information about a bird-friendly backyard that comes from them. So if you look here, and again, you're not going to necessarily plant all of these things in your yard. Remember last week I was talking about the snags. So over in the left-hand side, you see that snag, which is basically a dead tree. we cut ours. We had to get rid of a blue spruce in our backyard. So we had it cut and we had it left with like about 10 feet of the tree standing still. And that's where that flicker ended up building its nest, which was really cool, or nest hole. And so that's why those trees are really important. And if you don't want to have it up in the air like this, just even having a log on the ground can be really, really helpful. The insects will eventually disintegrate it, but you might see a pileated woodpecker come by and be checking it out, or get more woodpeckers in your yard that way. Vines help to provide nesting locations and also produce berries. Shrubs provide cover, which means that helps the birds find a way to scatter if they see a hawk or something and they need to find some safety. They also have nesting locations and they attract the insects. Wildflowers, of course, attract pollinators and insects, and they produce the nectar and the seeds. All very important. Grasses can provide cover and seeds and attract insects. I'm in the process of slowly changing my yard over from grass and grass seed to actually white clover. Um, and I happen to love how it looks when it's in bloom, but the bees love it, which is even more important to me. And our pollinators are in trouble. And anything that we can do to help our pollinators, uh, obviously is good for us as well. It's crucial for us, in fact. Um, the bigger canopy trees provide a lot of nest locations and nectars and berries. Ground covers attract insects. The thing that's really important is to realize that birds and insects all are kind of differently capable of different layers in your yard. If you ever wonder why a lot of birds aren't necessarily fighting all the time, some birds are ground feeders. Some birds like to be at the top of the canopy trees. Some birds want to be in shrubs. That's how they kind of, specialize so that they're finding their food and not necessarily competing all the time. Same for the insects as well. And of course, water attracts all kinds of birds, and a moving water feature is important because it also cuts down on the ability of the mosquitoes to breed in your water. Nectar plants are important for hummingbirds and other pollinators. So, what does that mean for you? It's like, well, you look at this and you think, boy, I'm not a gardener. I was never a gardener, and I am a bird lover. So I wanted to attract birds to my yard. And so I actually had someone come and help me design a front yard. The thing that's so important is you need to have a plan. And one of the biggest problems of springtime is that we all go to the garden store and you see all the springtime blooms and they're beautiful. And of course, you're going to want to buy them all and put them in your yard. But what you need to have is a plan because not everything blooms at the same time. And the goal could be, if you choose, to have things that are in bloom all the way through the year because that allows the birds and the pollinators to come at different times and have a food source all through the year. Um, the other thing is to remember that gardens take a long time to get established. You're not going to go out and have a full grown garden right away. It takes a good 3 years at least for a plant to reach its full potential in your garden. Now is a perfect time to be thinking about planning for next year's garden. And I just wanted to show how I did a little bit of very simple planning to be able to make sure that I was choosing plants to go in my backyard that would bloom during different times of the year. And the majority of these, of course, are going to be hummingbird and pollinator friendly because that's the whole purpose of why I garden is to bring the birds in. So generally, I plant perennials because I'm kind of a lazy gardener and I want to not have to take constant care of plants. So perennials and native perennials especially are really do best in our soils and in our climate. And so it can mean that you are decreasing the amount of actual care that you have to do. But you can see that if you know that you've got bulbs and they're gonna bloom out in the spring. I have a plant that's called Brunera, which is really, and I'll show you a picture of it later. It's really awesome because if you like hostas, but you have deer, this particular plant, the deer and the bunnies, I wouldn't say that they don't ever eat it, but they choose to avoid it because it's got a funny texture to the leaves. But they look a lot like hostas. They are shade plants and they have these beautiful, beautiful blue flowers that bloom out in April and May. But then the rest of the year they look like a hosta to me. And I particularly like Jack Frost Brunera. Coral bells, depending on the variety. Lantana is actually one of the few annuals that I plant. This is a plant that is a perennial when it's out in Arizona and in the summer or in the hot areas, but it is a beautiful plant that requires no care from you if you plant it in the ground, except for occasional watering if we get a real hot spell. And it blooms from the minute it goes in the ground to the first frost. And it is a hummingbird magnet and it is a butterfly magnet. So I always recommend Lantana, and you can get it at any of the big uh, Myers carries it, and obviously flowers shows or stores too, garden stores. Different hostas also bloom at different times. So I try to have a variety of different hostas in my yard. I do have a fenced backyard that keeps the deer out. The Brunera is all in my front yard where the deer are always munching. But the hostas will bloom at different times. And so it's really important to learn that there are oh my goodness, so many different varieties of hostas. I just got a hosta that I actually saw when I was in London, and it's called mouse ears, and it is the cutest little hosta, and it's just got a cute little flower on it. So, and then you've got the big, ginormous hostas. Some of mine are in bloom right now with the big white flowers that are so pretty. Coreopsis, coneflower, black-eyed Susan, butterfly weed, New England asters. So you can see I have spaced it out so that I always have something blooming in my yard. And then just to show you the difference, so this is springtime in my front yard. It's a few years ago. It's a little wilder looking even now. And then in the fall, it changes color. So after the lilac has bloomed out, here's the New England asters. And I also plant geraniums just because I like the old-fashioned look of geraniums. This little plant in the front right here is butterfly weed. That's another milkweed, but it doesn't get real long and leggy, so it's pretty in the front yard. And then this is a little bit farther down. You see, this is spring again, when everything's small, and then as things have filled in over the fall time. And it changes color. This is the Brunera right here in the middle. Got that kind of heart-shaped leaf. That is the Jack Frost Brunera. There are some that are different colors, just plain green. And then you can just kind of barely see it, the little blue flowers that are there. And this is the backyard that we were talking about, and this is my snags that you see here. This is before the woodpeckers found them. And this is probably the third rendition of this garden. I started it was very small in the beginning. That's a problem with gardens. They tend to grow because you just keep wanting to have more room. And so then I started to expand it to this side, and then we expanded to this side, and then we've even expanded it further now. But you can see what I've done is I've planned, there are taller plants to the back, and then the shorter plants in the front. Again, that layering concept, as well as just the structure so that you as the viewer can see all the plants when they're in the front, which is really nice. These were both spruces that we had to cut down because they were not going to make it, not going to survive. Back at the back of the plant of the garden here, you don't see it here, but is the cup plant, which is a fabulous plant if you have room for a tall plant, and it's one that the goldfinches just love in the fall. And this is showing you what it looks like as you get further into the year. Um, and so I've got a lot of this is the cup plant that I was just telling you about right here. It is so cool. And the goldfinches will just come in and cover it as they come in and eat the seeds. So it's really fun to watch. Um, so this would be later in the summer. And then after this, it really starts to it gets, I'm not somebody who goes out and weeds a lot. So it does get kind of ratty looking. Um, Here's where you can see where I expanded it again. I've got coreopsis, butterfly weed, coneflower, the cup plant at the back. Um, And then this is at later on from a different view, but that cup plant gets really, really tall. Got some Joe Pye weed here. Here's some bee balm in two different colors that we have. Cardinal flower, the gray headed cone flower here. Um, Variety of ferns, all sorts of different things for the bees and the birds to enjoy. And you might not want to do a huge garden. I'm concerned now, wondering how long am I going to want to keep it up, which is why I've switched over to perennials for the most part. But you can still do gardening in the small spaces. So this is lantana right here that you see, and also over here on this one, two different color variations of lantana. And what I love is that it changes color as it starts. So it starts off small, and then eventually this like full colored one is the final flower. But you can use pots. You don't have to be doing it all along your backyard like that. Use some different pots, hanging baskets. I like to hang a basket by my hummingbird feeder, so my hummingbird feeder up here. And of course, I always have red uh, flowers in there because I want it to attract the hummingbirds in. But you don't think you've got to do all of it all the time. Just think with pots. You can do that. It's really nice. And then don't forget water. If you have we've got three different spots where we have water in our backyard. And you notice that different birds will come, and you'll note they're also at different heights for that. Obviously, we've got suet plant. This is trumpet vine that's going crazy. Um, and then these again, my hummingbird feeders here. Through the winter, some people like to have a really neat and tidy yard, and that is completely a choice for you to have. I like to just leave, basically, I won't do anything to cut down on some of my plants I will cut down, not all of them, but mostly I just leave them so that the birds and the critters can come along, and bury themselves in there and survive the winter that way. And the reality is, I'm kind of a lazy gardener. I don't want to go out there and clean it all up all the time. These are kind of hard to see, but I do want to just show, like here in this little one at the bottom, that's a little hummingbird. Just showing you some of the birds and things that come. Um, Butterfly, and then this is where you see the goldfinches are on top of that Joe Pye, or excuse me, that flower. And again, like Elliot was saying, they're not necessarily the bright goldfinches that you think of. These are more of they're the fall plumage. I want to give you some really good resources. MSU, of course, is a fabulous resource for you as if you're a beginning gardener, if you're an experienced gardener, if you're a farmer, if you've got questions about trees or your lawn, just about anything. But there is a section on the MSU Extension website called Gardening in Michigan. And if you just Googled Gardening in Michigan, you'd come up with this website too, but I will send you the link. And you'll note across the top, if you've got gardening, vegetables, lawns, pollinators, trees and shrubs, fruit, flowers, soils, and then if you have indoor plants, you can go to here and they've just got just oodles and oodles of information for you, as well as online learning or the Master Gardener program. Since I don't do vegetable gardening, I just basically do my flower gardening. I will go in and start the smart gardening section. Um, they will tell you all about what what you can do to plant pollinators, and they have a lot of fact sheets and information that's there for you. A lot of lists of the right kind of plant that you want to get, lists of deer-resistant plants, which we all want. Um, and there's also a section called Ask Extension. So if you want to submit a question, it will go to somebody at MSU who will then reach back out to you and answer your question. I will guarantee you, if you ask a question about birds, it will probably be Elliot who sends you a response. I know he does a lot of Ask Extension things. Um, but this includes, I mean, whether this is your house plant or your vegetable garden, you can put a picture to them and say, hey, like, what's this weird mold on my, on my plant? What do I do about it? That sort of thing. It's really a fabulous service that MSU Extension does for the entire state of Michigan. Two resources that I think are really fantastic are at the michiganaudubon.org. And this first one here is a list of different, and I will send you the links to all of these. That's all the different plants that you might want to have for bird-friendly landscapes. And then the second one over here, the Native Garden Design, gives some fabulous actual layout suggestions on what type of garden that you might want to have, depending on your property and what you'd like. So those are really fabulous resources. Um, these are just, again, flowers from my garden. I get so much joy from going out and seeing what I have. But all of these, so obviously that's very popular with the bees. This is New England aster. Again, it's a fall bloomer, really popular with butterflies and bees. And it does grow pretty tall, though, so I don't know that it's necessarily a front yard uh, um, plant. Sorry, and but there are species of asters that are low to the ground too. This is sedum, autumn joy sedum. Again, butterfly weed, which is a milkweed, and then the cardinal flower, and this is bee balm over here as well. So those are just some of the flowers that I have growing in my backyard. Um, and I just want to encourage you that if you really love the birds, you want to do some thinking about what can I do to help the birds? What can we do? And pollinators in general, because it's critical to all of our survival that we have the pollinators out there and that we make sure that we can help these bird species to survive. That's what I find is the joy. I'm not, as we said before, I'm not as an intense birder like Elliot, but I get so much joy from seeing the birds and the bees and the butterflies and everything else that comes to my yard. And if I can grow flowers that will help to bring them to my yard, then that's what I'm going to do. So I would encourage you to do it as well.
Well, thank you, Cindy. I really appreciate you sharing about your yard and all that. And I just want to say thank you all for joining us. This kind of wraps up the presentation part of our fall two-part refresher, and it's over in a blip, just like that. But we will stick around for the Q&A, so don't leave and start getting your questions going in the Q&A box. But we do, just Cindy, I want to say again, thank you for joining us. We're glad that you're here, and we hope you get out there and go birding.